This morning, we're going to take a look at racism and the role of parents and educators in the fight against anti-Black racism. This is part of a three-part series we'll be airing on Mondays. Joining us today with a look at the historical context of systemic racism is education strategist Dwayne Matthews. Good to have you with us this morning, Dwayne.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.
This is a really important topic, not just for parents and educators to understand, but kids as well. There are a lot of dimensions of systemic racism, and we have a graph here that looks at 4 dimensions, ranging from institutional to internalized. I remember when this was first put out on social media, I found it so helpful. Can you help us unpack what it is that we're looking at here and the 4 platforms?
Sure. And so one of the challenges that people have with racism is that they think it's a personal pathology. So they think it's something that has to do with specifically with hate. And that's just one small component in one of the quadrants. You have to look at the whole structure of the systemic piece. And so when we look at those 4 dimensions, we can think about institutions, we can think about structural, we can think about internalized, and we can think about interpersonal. And institutions is really around, let's say, for example, schools or police force or religion, other types of institutions like this. An example of this would be the anti-Black racism report that came out around the Peel School Board. And it showed that, Black children were being streamed into certain components or certain subjects immediately as they came out of grade 8. The other piece is structural. Structural is really thinking about all of the institutions wrapped together, right? So think police, think school, think jobs, all of those things wrapped together. And then we look at internalized. So internalized are the small comments, the insinuations that reinforce negative stereotypes or negative personal look or outlook. And then the last of those is interpersonal. And that's the one that most of us know. That's the one that really has to do with the comments. It has to do with hate and all these components. Now, when you wrap all of this together across time, across a lifetime, across many different cultures, across 200 to 400 years, you start to understand the overall structural component combined. It's not just about hate. It's about all of those things. And myself personally, I've experienced racism at school. I've experienced racism with the police. I've experienced racism at work, and I have to deal with that every single day in some level or form. And over time, that becomes really, really challenging. Some people learn how to bottle those things over time, but some people, it comes and it grabs them, but it affects all of us all the time.
Dwayne, can you talk to us about the starting point of systemic racism? This is a phrase a lot of people are learning more about for the first time, but this is certainly not the first time in history where we have seen this. Talk to us about the origins.
So what's really interesting, I think, with the starting of the structure is the concepts themselves. The concepts and constructs, they have meaning. So I always ask people, can you think of when were people that were descendants of Europe, when were they called white? They weren't always called white. If you look back into history and we look at, the Romans considered themselves Romans, the Greeks considered themselves Greeks, there were Spartans and Athenians, but the concept of white altogether has a very specific time, probably about 100-year period where we see it really, really sort of starts to gel and take form right about the same time as Black. And that happens at the beginning or, starting point of the Atlantic slave trade, and it was used to justify slavery. Now, when you stretch that across time, you start to look and see that there's 339 years, and the chart says American slavery, but we're talking about British Empire,
right?
And then in the United States, 89 years of segregation, and then to the end. So we really look at the beginning of that and the beginning of those words and start to think about, why do we say white? Why do we say Black?
Dwayne, I want to thank you for bringing us that, and I'm so glad that this is the first in our 3-part series. We're going to continue to check in with you. I would urge people to check your social media feeds as well. Great viewpoints and a lens from an educator. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for watching. If you like this, be sure to subscribe here.
And you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.